anti-COVID lockdown protests in China, country's top security agency has called for a crackdown once again. Now, the stern warning comes amid intensified patrolling to curb protests against the zero-COVID policy. Now, surveillance has increased and security forces are also checking cell phones of the protesters and warning them against any potential demonstrations. Now, meanwhile, drones are also being used to monitor the movement of people. All right, amid the anti-COVID lockdown protests in China, the country's top security agency has called for a crackdown, and once again, now the stern warning comes amid intensified patrolling to curb protests against the zero COVID-19 policy. Now, surveillance has also increased and security forces are also checking cell phones of the protesters and warning them against any potential demonstrations. Meanwhile, drones are also being used to monitor the movement of the people there in China. So China there amid the unprecedented protests, China is warning of a massive crackdown. And this warning has been issued to the protesters, and surveillance has in fact been increased in China, and cops are also in fact going through the protesters' phones and going straight across to my colleague Srinjoy, who is joining us live on the broadcast for more on this. Srinjoy, if you could tell us about the crackdown that China is really, China's crackdown over the anti-lockdown protests.
Well, as soon as protests began, and they are beginning to spread, they're going to get bigger and bigger. China really has two choices. One, you start a crackdown, or two, give in to the protesters. In this case, clearly the Chinese have chosen to crack down as was expected. But so far, they have not taken extreme measures like move in tanks or fire on the protesters. What they have done are things that are working towards those extreme measures. They have started cracking down. They have started taking precautions. They have started taking action against the protesters. It's clear that the process has begun. Now we have to see what happens now. Will the protesters continue to go ahead and do what they are doing, or will they be cowed down? If they are cowed down, fine, everything is normal again, as it can be in China. But if they continue to protest, the question is, what happens? What will the Chinese do now? Because the last time there were huge protests, and that too, that was in only one city, was in Beijing during Tiananmen. Is this entire process going to lead to another Tiananmen? We do not know. But at this point, it's nowhere near that. At this point, there are protests in different parts of China, in many cities, in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Wuhan, various cities. But so far, the crackdown is not as violent as it was then. We will have to see, if the protests continue, what the Chinese will do.
Right, Srinjoy, many thanks for joining us with all those details. We'll have to wait and watch how things really pan out in China. All right, shifting focus after UK, US and UN, Canada has also joined the chorus condemning China for its clampdown on protesters. Now, voicing support for anti-COVID curbs protests, Canada Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that everyone in China should be allowed to protest and also express themselves. And meanwhile, Harvard University students were also seen gathering in support of Chinese protesters. About 50 students, in fact, chanted slogans in both Chinese and English, saying, "We are not slaves, we are citizens," and also demanding the resignation of Xi Jingping.